Hello and welcome to yesterday's Airlines. Phoenixmodels have just announced their July set of announcements. It's kind of their July set of announcements. It is just still July. But I'm sure that we won't be seeing these models till September, October. It does appear that Phoenix are running probably a couple of months behind their announcements. We still have not seen any of the June announcements, and it wasn't long ago that the May announcements actually appeared as real models. So bear that in mind. There is some small delay, nothing to really get concerned about, though, I would say. And Phoenix have been releasing a more interesting, a more diverse set of models this year than they have probably for a long time. And I know that a friend of mine is giving them some assistance with some ideas for releases, and they're taking that feedback on board, which is nice. They are still releasing a lot of 747s, and anyone watching my videos knows my opinion on their 747 classics. But they are releasing around that also a more interesting and diverse set, which includes, for the first time in a long time, some American releases. Phoenix have historically largely avoided America completely and focused primarily on Asia and Europe. So it's interesting that they are producing one or two American releases. Also, Phoenix are releasing quite a lot of wide bodies at the moment, and have been this year, and a lot less of their narrow bodies, and that bodes well too, because let's face it, a good chunk of their narrow body molds aren't particularly good. So, with all that said and done, we will get on to having a look at these Phoenix releases just announced in a few seconds. But obviously, if you haven't already, please subscribe to this video if you're keen to hear this kind of announcement, and subscribe to the channel. And if you enjoy the work that I do, then please keep on checking it out at Instagram, at YesToAirlines, at Facebook, at YesAirlines as well, and obviously at the website yesterdaysairlines.com, where a good chunk of this content emanates from. There's always new material coming up on the site. I post most days of the week, and usually 3 or 4 proper articles, amongst other photographs and analysis. So keep an eye out for that. But let's get in and check out the Phoenix announcements for July. So this month's release set is smaller than last month, substantially smaller, and I kind of get the feeling that Phoenix are struggling a little bit to deliver all the models they've announced recently. You'll notice that none of the releases announced this month have any artwork associated with them, which is a little unusual for Phoenix. So that suggests that perhaps they are struggling to digest the number of models they announced last month. But nonetheless, it is what would historically be a reasonably standard Phoenix size release set that we have here, and we've got 11 models to discuss. So that's not a bad number. Only 2 of those models are Airbuses, and we will start with those Airbuses in this video. The first one up is Delta Airlines A330-900 N421DX, and this is one of the 2 models this month from the United States, and as I said, quite unusual for Phoenix to release US models, but they are increasingly doing so, which is interesting. If you look at what Phoenix have made for Delta historically, they've only announced those 2 widget releases in the last few months this year, and before that they've never made a single Delta Airlines model, which kind of illustrates the point that I'm making here. But anyway, this is an A330-900. It comes in exactly the same month that Gemini have just announced an A330-900, so that's perhaps just coincidence there. I've done a detailed comparison of the 2 A330-900 molds that are available over at yesterday's Airlines. Check that out. The Gemini JC mold is better in my opinion, and by a reasonable distance, I have to say. So I don't love the Phoenix version. That doesn't mean I wouldn't buy it. It's not awful, but it's just not as good as the Gemini JC. I've got a CityLink version, And although it looks okay, it's very Phoenixy, shall we say, in the sense that it really looks very much like their standard A330 with new engines and a new wing put on it. The undercarriage is a little bit silvery, and the main gear is their classic A330 gear, kind of touches the ground. But I'm not too fussed about that. I quite like their old A330. I am more concerned about the detail of the wings, especially the winglets, and in other areas it just doesn't really quite match the Gemini JC. But it's not a dreadful model either. Having said that, in this case, this will be only the 4th Delta A330-900 that's been made. One of those was the Team USA version. Obviously, all the other releases are Gemini. I would still go with the Gemini version over this one. So this one seems a little bit pointless. It has been made before. I'm going to make this workhorse. Not going to be awful by a long shot, but I don't really understand why you wouldn't go with the Gemini version, especially since they've both been announced in the same month. The second Airbus is a Lufthansa A340-300 DAI Golf uniform, and this is wearing the current livery of Lufthansa. And it's not unique in the sense that it has been made twice before. It's been made in 2020 by Panda Models, and their A330 is, or was, should I say, because I don't think they've got access to it anymore, is exceptional. It's also been made in 2020 by it's Gemini, by Gemini using the JC mold, which isn't as good, but again isn't awful either. I'm looking at the pictures of that model, it doesn't look dreadful. I do really like the Phoenix A340, and this will be a very nice model. It's been 3 years since those last releases. I guess there's potentially a good chance that you didn't catch that earlier version. Of the three, I'd say the Panda is likely to be the best, but it's also the hardest to find, and there's probably quite a gap for this one. So for this one, I think that it's probably quite a sought-after aircraft livery combo. It's a good mould, and I'm going to put this one into High Flyer. Now that is all of the Airbuses out of the way for this month. And we move on to the Boeings, and the only narrow body release this month is a Qatar Airways 737 MAX 8 A7BSC. This model appears to be largely superfluous to me. It's well known that I'm not a fan of Qatar Airways anyway, but it has been announced by ngmodels. I believe it's also just been announced as a future release by Gemini. So there are going to be 2 other versions of this model coming out soon. And they're both going to be substantially better than this one, because the Phoenix Max just isn't particularly good. It's better than their next generation 737, I agree, but it is not better than anyone else's Max. Even though the nose form is decent, the undercarriage is not, the engines are not, the wing tips are not as good, the tail cone is not correct. It's got that very old-fashioned vertical stabilizer with a rudder effectively just attaching directly to the fuselage. When you compare it to the new NG73 Max, it doesn't look anywhere near as good, and there's no reason I can see to be buying it. So for me, this one, nice and easily, this one's a gas guzzler. If you want a Qatar Max, then you're going to have 2 better candidates available, one of which has been properly announced and will be out very soon, I imagine, by NG, and the other one which has been announced as a future release by Gemini. So we're in now to the 747s. There are a couple this month, CAAC B2440 and a Lufthansa delivery colours DABZD. I've talked about these 747s a lot in terms of the mould, and I know that their 747-200 isn't as bad as their Series 400, but that's kind of like saying that getting shot in the leg is better than cutting your leg off with a rusty spoon. Okay? It's still really bad. And I've seen some posts where people post pictures and go, oh, actually, this is better than I expected, but they're very low expectations, I think. I really don't think that the mould looks good. And any sensible comparison of it with any other 747-200 in the scale is going to illustrate that. In this case, for these two models, there are available older releases which are much, much superior. Neither of them are enormously hard to find, I think. For CAAC, there's an in-flight 400 release using the Witty mold, probably the best 747 that's ever been made in the scale. Very nice. I can't believe it's a particularly popular airline for Western collectors anyway, but I own that model and that's a really nice release. And for Lufthansa, if you're looking for a 747-200 in delivery colours, you can't really go too far wrong, frankly, just with the Dragon Wings version. The mould is vastly superior, even with the simple undercarriage. And anyone who's buying models because they have aerials or slightly nicer undercarriage, when they're happy to accept that the rest of the aircraft doesn't look like a 747, that just doesn't make sense to me. So I imagine the Lufthansa version is quite easy to find. I own that one too, and I certainly wouldn't waste my time trying to replace it with something from Phoenix. So there are alternatives that are better, and they're just older. So yeah, I just don't understand getting all caught up on super detailed printing when you're effectively putting that detailed printing onto a brick masquerading as a 747. So for me, these two are clearly scrap metal, and I will continue to scrap metal Phoenix 747 classics because they're bad models. But from this point onwards, I think this release set really improves, actually. And the next two models are 767-300s. I quite like, in fact, I like a lot, I'd say, the Phoenix 767-300. It's an interesting comparison with the Gemini version. The Phoenix one does not have any wing seam, whereas the JC Gemini does. But it is a little bit slab-sided around the wing there. It doesn't show the fairing very well. But nonetheless, it looks nice. I've got a few of these. The two here I'm showing both Shanghai Airlines, and overall it's a nice mould that presents very well. I'm sure there could be a better 767-300 made, but this one isn't bad at all, and so that's always a good start when you're talking about new releases. Also, the choices here are both pretty interesting. The first one up is Air Seychelles. It is registered S7AHM, and this is actually the very first time there has been an Air Seychelles 767 made in the scale, so that is really nice. It is wearing the current colours, and they are very attractive, but I have to admit they're not as interesting to me personally as the colours that went beforehand. I used to see Air Seychelles 767s at Gatwick quite a lot as a kid, though it was the 200, not the 300. But I do believe the 300 were the old colours as well. So I would personally have preferred the old colour scheme, but at the same time, this is going to look really nice, and it is a unique model and on a good mould, and all of those things together mean that this one surely is supersonicing its way up to the top there. Really nice model. And again, the next aircraft which they're putting out here is another interesting 767, and this one is in the colours of Etihad Airways, and I didn't actually even know that Etihad had flown 76s. This one's registered A6 Echo Yankee Zulu, by the way. Looking it up, they did operate just this single aircraft right back in the beginning days of Etihad in 2004, and that's quite interesting itself. I'd probably like to learn more about that and what they were doing with this aircraft, which came via the Abu Dhabi Amiri flight, and looks like it went back to them as well. So that is interesting, and it's a nice scheme Etihad have got, to be honest. And again, nobody has made this in the scale either. So once again, potentially interesting history there for this aircraft. It's got quite a nice scheme on it and a nice mould, and no one's made it supersonic. Again, really good. We upsize our neck Boeings into 777 territory, and there are a trio of new 777s from Phoenix this month. The Phoenix 777 mould is one that's been lauded for many years. It has now been largely surpassed by new moulds, I admit. on the 300 side of things, you've got the Aviation 400 molds, super nice. And then across the board, you've got the NG molds, which are also very good, though perhaps not quite as good as the JC Gemini versions, which are floating around. So there's lots of competition in this 777 space. The Phoenix mold looks a little bit old by comparison, but it's still decent as long as they print things properly. So not really a bad mold by any means, even though it is one of the older 777s that is out there nowadays. This month we've got 3 choices. There's some interest in these, not all of them, but there's some interest. The first one is a China Postal Airlines freighter, B221X. I imagine this is not a model which is going to excite a great deal of the collectorate here, but it is one that interests me. The only thing that's slightly off-putting here is that it has been announced by jcwings in an interactive version. So do you want to go for the slightly inferior mold as a non-interactive model with Phoenix, which will be out sooner, or do you want to wait for the interactive version from jcwings? I'm not sure what I want to do there. So interesting that's a bit of a quandary. But nonetheless, if we ignore that, it's a relatively nice scheme that China Post are putting on this. The big EMS tiles on the tail aren't especially beautiful, but the rest of the scheme's quite nice. And no one else aside from that announced JC have made this one. So for me, yeah, I'm going to put this one in high flyer. I like this potential of this one. I think it will turn out quite nicely, and I'm tempted to get it though. I'm also tempted to get that interactive 777 from JC, and maybe I should just wait. It really is a problem when you don't know how long it's going to take jcwings to get their models to market. Not sure what I'll do there. But either way, this should be a nice model from Phoenix. Next up is a Qatar Airways 777 freighter, and I talk about Qatar Airways way too much. A7BBH here. This model's been announced by ngmodels recently. I'm sure. I almost can't be bothered to even look up whether it has, but I'm pretty certain it has. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if it's also been made historically by Phoenix too, frankly, because they've made a reasonable number, I think, of Qatar 777s in the past. I'm just going to put this one into workhorse. I don't want to discuss it. It's a meaningless model that they probably need to produce, but it's not going to be a bad model. It's just not an interesting model. What is interesting, however, is the next release, and this one is another American aircraft. It is United Airlines this time around, and it's a 777-300 in the Evo Blue scheme. The aircraft is registered N2749 uniform, and when you first look at this, you go, "Oh, this one's just another of these," and they've not made an Evo Blue 777 before because, frankly, as I said before, they just don't make American material very often. But this one actually is different to all the previous releases, and it does seem like it's been largely skimped in the media that I've seen so far. This one has got the decal by the cockpit for Sydney World Pride. It's basically got a koala, which has a big rainbow flag in its hands, and it's wearing sunglasses too. It looks quite cool, and it's coming out of one of the rear cockpit windows. Yeah, I like the look of this, I have to say, and it's nice to see the scheme, this variant of it, which no one else has made before, and yeah, this one's got a lot of potential, I have to say. Is it enough for me to put it in supersonic? I'm not sure it is a supersonic in terms of the mold, and I wonder how many people will be turned off by the pride aspect of this. But I like it. I think it's good. I'm going to put this one in high flyer. I think it's going to be nice. And that leaves just one model to discuss this month, the non-Airbus Boeing component, and this one is I'd say Aeroflot, but everything was Aeroflot back then. It's not really Aeroflot. It's an Il-96 300. It's effectively in house colours, which in the Soviet times was Aeroflot. It's got the old CCP, i.e. SSSR, Reg 96000. It's a testbed aircraft. Looks like it was at Paris in the late 1980s. In June 89, I see pictures of it at the Le Bourget Air Show. And it's basically quite similar to a version they'd made previously, which was also an air show variant. It's got number underneath the cheat line, in this case 386, but it does have these big 96300 titles on the rear fuselage, which I guess is the differentiating factor that makes it different from the previous release. And I guess there's not a lot you can really do with the Il-96 in terms of liveries. They have now made this will be the 7th Il-96 which has Aeroflot affiliations of some kind, but it is a unique one. It is different, and their mold is really nice for the 96. I'm not sure I will be getting this one, I have to say, because it's a little bit too similar to the one that I already own, but it does look like it will be nice, and it's a really good mold, and it's just nice to see things that aren't Airbus and Boeing, isn't it? So yeah, I'm going to put this one in the high flyer, I think. Not high flyer, sorry, supersonic even. I'm going to supersonic it, yeah. It's good to see them releasing some 96s. Nice to see some diversity of aircraft types. So yeah, I'll supersonic this one. And yeah, it's been a good end to this release set, hasn't it? After a relatively lackluster start, it's gotten substantially better, and there's some really interesting choices being made there by Phoenix. So that's it for this month's Phoenix announcements. As always, you know, I hate those 747s, and when they do start using their 747 mold, then yeah, they're not going to be great. But they are making some good choices, and they are using some of their better molds. A340s, 767s, 777s, Il-96s, these are all safe bets with Phoenix. I do believe there are some more T154s coming, but they've been delayed till next month, so it'll be interesting to see those. But overall, you've got to say here that with models like the Lufthansa 340, the Seychelles and Etihad 767s, that United 777 and the Aeroflot 96, there are some really good selections, some really nice models that will be produced on solid molds there. So it's not a bad month at all by Phoenix. In fact, they're having a reasonably decent year if you can just ignore all those 747 classics. But that's it for this month from yesterday's Airlines. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. As I said before, please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.